Now, the government has begun consulting on ways to allow adults to change their gender legally without having been diagnosed with gender dysphoria or indeed actually begun to transition. But there are a lot of questions being asked about the best way to deal with children who are unhappy with the body they were born with. Last month, I spoke to a woman who wanted to change her gender and eventually injected herself with hormones that she'd bought over the internet, and then she began to regret her decision.
I injected testosterone, I think, for about 12 months. After which I realised that I wasn't comfortable with what was happening to me. And I was also way out of my depth medically. I mean, I'm a medical student now, but I wasn't at the time. And even now, I wouldn't know much about that side of things. So I got a bit frightened.
Well, I'm joined in the studio by Lord Winston, Robert Winston, Professor of Science and Society and Emeritus Professor of Fertility Studies at Imperial College London, and Professor Gary Butler, who's a consultant in paediatric and adolescent medicine at University College Hospital in London. And Lord Winston, you're concerned that children are being treated too early for conditions that we don't properly understand.
I think my fundamental concern is that we haven't really defined what is really wrong. I think that's the problem. What is the cause of people who are seeking gender reassignment? And there's increasing evidence that hormonal influences before birth, perhaps at very early at the time of conception, can alter cognitive function, can alter the way people feel about themselves afterwards. There's research going on in Singapore at the moment, which I'm involved with, and also some of the stuff we're doing at the Genesis Research Trust at Imperial College. And I think these epigenetic factors may be quite important with some of these young people. And I think until we define the problem, and that's always difficult with cognitive issues, I think we're going to have really a very blunderbuss problem, which we try to sort out, but really without understanding the fundamentals underneath the cause.
So if a child goes to his or her parent and says, I want to be a boy or a girl, whatever it is, how should the parent react?
Well, I think it's a very difficult question. And I think, of course, it's absolutely right to involve people like Gary, because of course, they've got a multi-speciality approach to this problem. But I think it's something that we need to be very gentle about. He has the experience of doing this, which I don't have. I mean, my view is really much more in terms of the reproduction. Gary is he's the practical.
All right, well, let's ask you then, Professor Butler, this question of having failed to, so far anyway, to define what it is.
I think it's a question of bringing into the whole reality of what type of extent of a problem we're dealing with. It still is incredibly rare. We're looking at probably one child born in every 20,000, or possibly rarer than that, who are questioning their gender.
But it seems to be increasing. It does seem to be increasing, doesn't it?
Yes, but even so, it's still incredibly rare. But I think it's one of those. We have to probably define the two ranges of presentations. One where children come along right from the start, explain to their parents as soon as they can recognise whether they're a boy or girl, and perhaps expressing that they are not, and being very unhappy with that. But the largest proportion are those who are presenting perhaps in puberty. Puberty seems to be a very defining process which changes the whole perception of gender, and I think there are a lot of factors there which we haven't yet untangled.
Yeah, Lord Winston.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, one of the problems, of course, is the brain is reassigning itself at the time of puberty in a major way. And, of course, decision-making, risk-taking, a whole range of things happen then. But
so are you saying that we shouldn't, or we should encourage young people, children, not to take any decisions before puberty?
Well, I don't know. I really don't. I don't think I know the answer to that. But what I do know is that there is a real risk in doing this, because if you look at the results of gender reassignment, the results are horrendous in such a big proportion of cases. For example, with vaginal reconstruction, there are probably 40% of people who have that have some complication, often need further surgery. Male reconstruction is very, very difficult. When you start taking off breasts, a large number, probably 23%, according to a very recent paper, feel uncomfortable with what they've done. And I think those sorts of issues are important. Then, of course, what I have been seeing, of course, in a fertility clinic are the long-term results of often very unhappy people who now feel quite badly damaged. So I think, from my point of view, of course, one has to consider, when you're doing any kind of medicine, where you're trying to do good, not harm, and looking at the long-term effects of what you might be doing. And for me, that is really a very important warning sign.
And Professor Butler, do you accept what Lord Winston was saying there, that if I report him accurately to you, that we really have to be terribly careful about doing anything before, or allowing encouraging a child to do anything before puberty?
I think that's right. Ideally, we would try and support them, but not to try and help them change their mind or change their view. It's a supportive and educational process. That's why my colleagues at the Tavistock Centre in London are the key to help this exploration. It's part of gender identity development, and that's what our service is called. But I think actually, the small numbers, the 20% who present before the age of puberty, of those, only 1 in 20 will move forward to think about a more permanent gender assignment process. And then it's a stage-by-stage process where we will perhaps interrupt puberty, pause it for a short while until people are more mature, or if they're ever mature enough to take decisions.
But isn't even pausing puberty before, at what sort of stage? I suppose that's the question, and you're nodding at my concern about that, Lord Winston.
Well, indeed, I think, because of course sometimes, I mean, as Kate, you're the person you were talking to on the radio.
The one who'd injected herself with hormones, yes. But that was to change her gender.
Well, that was an amazing interview, I thought, a very revealing interview. And I mean, I think, all she had done was take hormones, but of course it resulted in excessive hair growth and something that she's still trying to cope with. And of course, the long-term effects of that are likely really to affect reproductive function.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's what our worry is. I think puberty, if it's paused in the minority of the young people we see, will maybe change the maturation process. But the vast majority of young people are gone through the process of puberty, and it is that debate as what to do about their long-term future. There's obviously some cosmetic worries that they have, but what we major on is really trying to look at their fertility and their fertility options and what can be done. And this is sometimes where the NHS processes do let us down, because it's available in some areas and not in others, and also this whole moral debate as to whether we should actually be offering fertility conservation for the young people. You can only have to read the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday to know the vitriolic type views that are expressed by some people about this.
Do you share any of those views, Lord Winston?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure. I mean, I think we should try and preserve reproductive function in people with cancer because, of course, that is a very, very serious issue. But on the whole, for example, freezing eggs is extremely unsuccessful. Although it's never admitted, it is true from the national statistics how poor the chances of pregnancy are afterwards. With freezing of sperm, there's no question that freezing does damage sperm. And it makes less fertility. And there are a large number of people who've frozen sperm samples who never actually achieve a pregnancy after that freezing. So, I mean, it is not a totally reversible step, one has to say, even under ideal circumstances.
Professor Butler, quick thought, if I may. Are we moving too fast?
I think at the present time, it's very difficult when you're dealing with a flood of very distressed young people, trying to hold them at bay, trying to keep things in a sort of sensible perspective while we're trying to explore things further. And that's what we're trying to do at the present time without having to change everything radically.
Gary Butler, Robert Winston, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.